All right, are we live? Okay, cool. Well, thanks everybody for showing up. I am excited to be here today in this Tuesday Takeover. Dave is traveling, so you've got a few guests on the call today. I'm Kristin Messerli. I'm the Executive Director of First Home IQ, where we're educating the next generation about homeownership and financial wellness. I've got a couple of really special guests. Todd, you know well, and Blake Boss is what is your title?
Executive Vice President and Head of Sales.
Oh, very fancy. Okay, love it. At Active Comply. He's also a Gen Zer. And so I'm excited for us to talk about this topic. Wanted him to join as the resident Gen Zer of the industry. I feel like always speaking on behalf of this whole generation. And then, of course, you know, Todd's co-founder with me on First Home IQ, also runs Win by Noon and lending business. I don't need to describe his whole background, but I wanted to have both perspectives here of a Gen Z consumer who's also been in the industry for a long time, as well as Todd being in the industry for a long time and kind of bringing the loan officer perspective as well. So this is going to be a kind of casual conversation. I'm going to share some of the research that I recently pulled like last week on the Gen Z population, and we'll talk about it and go from there. So, but if anyone has questions or thoughts, would love for you guys to drop those in the chat section or wherever you're watching this, and we can have a conversation all together. So, Todd, thank you so much for joining.
You know, it's my pleasure. I'm glad that I could be the Gen Xer that's talking about the Gen Z stuff with you all today.
Okay, I didn't want to make an assumption about Gen X, but okay. Glad we've got now 3 generations represented here. I'll be the millennial. We've got Gen X and Blake. Thanks for joining us as Gen Z.
Yeah, no, I'm super glad that I could be a part of this. So thank you for including me, Kristin. And I like being a perspective for Gen Z, since everyone wants to talk about it right now. It's kind of rare to find people that are in the mortgage industry that have a voice to talk about how to, I guess, market to them, how to serve them properly. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is really interesting. It's felt like just, I don't know how you feel, but in the last few months, we've seen just a really big influx of conversation around Gen Z. And I don't know if I think some of it is that we're seeing more Gen Z in the market, but also this shift towards first-time homebuyers and thinking about like, how do we adapt to today's market with all the changes in technology and the way that, how we adjust to the first-time homebuyer. So I wanted to start by sharing there was a news clip that was shared from the MBA from I think this was Zillow that published some research showing that the younger generations believe in homeownership but don't know how to achieve it. I think one of the big takeaways was that they said half of the people in the study said they thought they would need to win the lottery to be able to buy a home. And really? Yeah, and it's interesting because we know affordability is a really big challenge. And I did a survey last week that it won't be published until June 1st, but I wanted to share some of this here and also get feedback as we're kind of like shaping the story here. But I expected, I think affordability is a really big challenge, but it's also something that the majority of respondents that we had, which was 200, so it's going to be less than what Zillow had, but still statistically significant. They still envisioned buying a home within, I think it was half envisioned it within the next 5 years. And the vast majority envisioned it at least within their lifetime. So it's something that people are clearly hoping for, they are planning for. We know Gen Z tends to be more conservative around their finances and really like thinking about, how to support their finances in a more thoughtful way than maybe us millennials had done at that age. but there's still a shift happening around how they're thinking about home buying. So have either of you had any experiences around, or Blake, let's start with you, around, thoughts that around this generation thinking about affordability and whether homeownership is even in sight?
Yeah, it's funny because the way I want to answer this is probably a little different than how you're going to expect, but I really think that Gen Z and really that next gen of home buyers, they really want to follow in the same footsteps of their peers or people that they know. So they really want to be able to take the same steps that someone else took. And I think it's this whole, I go on Yelp to look up reviews for Chinese food or whatever food I want to go get. Whereas I think my generation, the Gen Z, really wants to go to their peers and figure out, how did you do this process? Can you afford a home? So if someone else can afford a home in your peer group, maybe you can also. So I think those less doing things on your own, since we are so interconnected through technology, that Gen Z really wants to know if one of their peers did it, maybe they can do it also. So in terms of affordability, I think they're just going to piggyback off of where their friends are at, where their peers are at, and kind of take that as a notion. Because I know whenever I first applied for my first credit card, when I was in college, I didn't think a credit card was really attainable at the time. And that's just a small piece of credit. But learning from my friends, oh yeah, just sign up for this American Express, or sign up for this Chase card. You can do it online. I took those steps because my peer group were taking those steps to achieve some sort of credit. So I just think that's what the generation is doing in terms of affordability. Would you, I guess, what you see from your research, or is it a little different?
No, definitely. And I think it's interesting to think about how we have made a shift recently towards this kind of, and it's always been influencer focused in some way, but the way that we talk about it and the way that influencers show up in our lives through social media and that type of thing has shifted. But I do think that we are trusting in products and processes and that type of thing based on what we see individuals doing. And so the more that we can see reflected back to us in, like, I think, I follow a ton of financial influencers and that type of thing, but the more I can see people who look like me doing things with their money that make sense to me, that are explained back to me, the more likely I am to follow that. And so I think that kind of aligns with what you're saying of like, yeah, I'm going to go along with what my friends are doing in some ways, but also if I am exposed to this in a way that makes it seem attainable to me in other ways, I think that's like, jumping straight into strategies, a way that you can reach this generation,
Yeah, I would agree. And when I think of, and you used the word influencer, and I think historically influencers have been celebrities. And now, since there's been such a huge change, since content creation is so much easier, people aren't looking at the, professional athletes to see what they're doing in terms of their purchases. People aren't looking at the Kardashians and saying, oh, maybe I want to buy the same Rolls Royce or jet as them. People are looking at the influencers that aren't celebrities, the ones that are much more like themselves and making decisions on what they're doing. So they're influencing like the largest decisions for these people nowadays. And I'm sure there are people out there that are still following the celebrity influencers, but really the influencers that are influencing your daily decisions are the ones that are making the biggest impact for consumers, especially in the mortgage business.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Todd, do you think, what have you noticed shifting in the market when it comes to the way that we're communicating with, or how consumers are responding when it comes to the next generation? And are you even getting much like Gen Z business in particular?
I see it through two different lenses, right? I lead a large mortgage team, that does over $100 million a year for more than a decade. And so I see it through the lenses of the conversations that they're having, as well as the conversations of my Win by Noon users. And then I also see it as a dad who has 3 daughters, 2 of whom are Gen Z. And my middle daughter, who's a school teacher, so she's, pretty smart kid. And she's said, hey, Dad, I'm following this person. I joined her private Facebook group. Don't worry, I didn't pay anything. So first off, she already knows I'm cheap. So she says, don't worry, I didn't pay anything. I said, oh, awesome. Where'd you find her? And she said, I found her on TikTok. And I said, oh, great. What does she teach? She said, she teaches strategies on how to save money and how to build wealth really all the same things that you've always taught me, Dad. And so that was kind of the light bulb that went off is that that's really what Blake's saying, hey, people want to learn from their peers. That was a perfect example of it, because here's my daughter who wants to assure me that she's not doing things that I wouldn't want her to do as her dad, but telling me, hey, I'm learning it over here because it's someone that's more like me.
Yeah. And that's also a parent dynamic, because my poor dad has talked about, building wealth through homeownership, all of that my whole life. And it took me a long time to listen to him and follow some of the things that he's been talking about. And I'll say, yeah, I learned it over here.
Well, and I think that's what I'm most excited for about what we're going to do at First Home IQ is the fact that we're going to create the education and get it out there, because ironically, I feel like I probably didn't teach my kids enough, but I think they learned through osmosis, right? They heard the conversations when I was a practicing loan officer of wealth building calls that I had with clients, since that's what I've always led with in my business. And then they also saw me and how I acted in the conversations I had with my wife around money and how we spent our money on experiences, but also invested in real estate to build a portfolio that, transparently gave us wealth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And something that Todd, you and I have talked about, and Blake, I think us as well, that just as we're building First Home IQ, one of the big challenges has been how we how we communicate the content. And so people aren't going to just read everything online and believe what they're reading. I think that we have a growing skepticism with everyone, but especially younger generations. They're really increasing their skepticism. And so it's really important that we have that the content paired with, or the education paired with individuals who are going out in their community and sharing that kind of information. And better yet, that they are hearing that from their peers and stuff as well. But I do think that it's important in today's world that we don't think everything is just technology focused and it's all about consuming information online, because that is a component, but it's not going to be everything, because there's so much available online that it has become something to distrust.
Yeah. So my question then for Blake would be, I love the idea that Gen Z is going to learn from their peers, and if they can see one peer buy a home, then they potentially will believe that they can buy one too. So what's that first domino? How do we get the first Gen Z in a social group to buy and then talk about it so that other people seem like, hey, maybe that's a good idea for me to build long-term wealth?
Yeah, I think, and just to be transparent, I'm not a homeowner yet. And it really, I feel like a fraud working in the mortgage business and not owning a home. And I know that this is the year. And one of my best friends of all time, and she actually works with me too, her name's Allie Carty. And she has been doing a ton of research with her peer groups, with her own peer group about what they're doing for home ownership. And her and I are both 25 years old. We're older Gen Zers. We're not millennials, but we're definitely Gen Z. And we both know that this is the year that we want to buy homes. And we don't know anybody that is in our peer group that owns homes yet. We have maybe one or two friends that might own a home. So really what we have been doing and talking to mortgage lenders about is, how are you going to convince us, people that are working in the business, on that we can actually afford a home today? Because I still have some skepticism for myself. Like, am I able to make this decision yet? And there's still no loan officers today that have approached me just working in the business. And I used to work for a mortgage lender. No one has ever approached me to try to figure out, how can I help you, Blake, get a home? And I think just being able to approach these younger people and just try to walk them through it. And of course, everyone can walk through the mortgage process as they're going to buy a home. But I really think trying to convince and tell these Gen Zers, it's way easier than you think. Like, let me take you through the journey so that you can own a home. Because right now, like maybe a year ago, I was thinking, oh, this is a 5-year plan. Now for me, it's a less than 1 year plan. And honestly, with the rate environment, it's kind of like, at this point, it's whatever. I mean, it doesn't look like anything's going to go down anytime soon, at least not significantly. And just to be able to buy a home, I'd be okay with the interest rates that are there today. So I think just trying to help someone understand that it's way easier than you think is probably that first step for that domino effect to occur. But I mean, I'm still in the early stages of my career. My peers are still in the early stages of their career. It's hard really getting someone to not focus on everything around them. So trying to focus on this one individual project, I guess, is what someone needs. And for me, it'd be nice to have a loan officer come to me and say, hey, Blake, we're going to make this happen in 3 months. Are you okay with that? And me, if I agree, I would hope that they could help me get to that point in 3 months. So just having someone really push you off the deep end is what I think we need.
Yeah, I think it's really, I would imagine whenever I bought a home a couple years ago, that was my second home to buy, but I had a big gap in there when I moved to Los Angeles. And I thought when I even approached the home buying process that it was going to be a 5-year plan for me as well. And then I bought within like 3 months or something. And that's a very common story I hear from a lot of first-time home buyers or young home buyers, that even people who I've spent a lot of my career educating people on home ownership or developing educational content. And yet I still didn't see how that was going to apply to me directly, or I was skeptical about whether or not this was going to be a good, decision for me. And I think that when we talk about like how to have conversations, it has to be hyper personalized. And there was a question that came in from Paul Hurley. What would Blake say is the best way to get the attention of someone like him to explain the home building process? I would imagine home ownership process. Would you say, Blake, that this is something having to do with the personalization to your situation, or how would you respond to that?
I would say it is all about personalization. And it seems like that's just the way Gen Z is going to be, because it's not a one size fits all type of plan. So I really think the personalization is a big aspect of it. But also at the same time, it sounds like this is a question from a loan officer talking about, hey, how can we start serving people like you? Well, I would say the number one thing would be not to sell our generation on a mortgage. That's not I don't think that's what's gonna work. I think what's gonna work is building the relationship first and showing them the educational component through resources like First Home IQ, and being able to say, hey, this is how you get to the point. I'm going to show you how to get there, not tell you that this is the best product with the best rate or whatever it may be. I really think it is that personalization, and then really showing and telling and talking and teaching rather than selling. Selling should be the last component of the journey for Gen Z.
Yeah, definitely. I think selling today is about educating and building that relationship, and probably always has been that way. But I think it's shifted in the way that we really approach today's home buyers. So I want to share a little bit of the research that I have pulled from last week, and what you can go through each category and then talk about them. I'm going to come back to this outline and start with, some people have had questions around whether Gen Z is really in the market, and while it does make up a small portion of home purchases today, we have a significant wealth transfer happening, and a lot of still a lot of direct spending power. So the number globally is at, in the US, 143 billion. There is a significant amount of parental support, which doesn't mean that they are not going to use that parental support for home buying. And so I think a lot of times people think, well, they're still getting support from their parents, or even they're in college. Well, a lot of Gen Zers are looking or collaborating with their parents on getting that down payment, or even, Dave talks a lot about tapping into their parents' equity and kind of leveraging that for a down payment. But also there's a lot of college students who are planning for what's their next step immediately to build wealth. And that's a shift from where millennials were. The majority, maybe not the majority, but a significant defining characteristic of millennials was like, we got to think about right now, not the future, because we're entering adulthood during or right after the financial crisis. And there was a lot of factors going into the recession. And I think that for a variety of reasons, Gen Zers are much more conservative and think a lot more about strategically and smarter about their finances. So going into then how we think about reaching Gen Z, I want to share the main 3 challenges that came up. We started to talk about affordability, and then education, lack of support. These are areas that came up in the research. And as a reminder, I don't know if I mentioned this, but this research will be published June 1st. So I'm sharing with you guys very raw data that just came in last week. So it's just a sneak peek into the information here. But before I get into, well, one of the challenges that has come up that we've been talking about is kind of shifts in perception around homeownership. And I definitely don't think this is just Gen Z. I think this is all first-time homebuyers. But this perception that there's uncertainty in the ability to build wealth. This was a really shocking statistic that we found, that 1 in 3 said that they were not sure that owning a home was the best way for them to build generational wealth. And one of the stat came in last October that Gen Z were less likely than millennials to think that buying a home was going to be a good investment. So I just wanted to touch on that, since Blake, you were mentioning how this was kind of something that you were a little bit skeptical about. And the way that we're approaching the concept, or like having these conversations, can't just be about the how. It really needs to be painting the picture of the why. Any thoughts from either of you?
No, well, yes. So when you're talking about like the 3 areas that those Gen Zers are facing, like the 3 areas of concern or whatever the road bumps are, I saw lack of support listed when you just covered that. And I think lack of support is probably, it was 3rd on the list. And I would be curious to know if you could break it down further for future research. But I feel like a lot of the time these loan officers are not acting like a support system for the younger generation. And I think, and this is a stereotype, but a lot of people like to say that Gen Z is sensitive. And I think that having someone that is willing to be an emotional support, I guess, consultant through the process is probably one of the largest components of that. Because I would say with the lack of financial literacy, not knowing where you sit in terms of financial security, I think is one of the hardest things to really comprehend without having that financial literacy like in check. But certainly the lack of support. I mean, having someone that could be there for you and be a friend through the process, I would say would be what I would need for getting over that hurdle.
So it just makes me think, because loan officers like to show up and throw up. And so when you said before that, they need to be telling more stories and sharing examples, and then you're talking really, I think, about empathy, right? Being empathetic, and it's just a different conversation than I think loan officers, at least the average age of loan officers is in the late 50s now. So I think that's part of the challenge. And,
right.
What I love is that in the Trust Engine community and the Win by Noon community, and now with First Home IQ, we've got a lot of people that are multi-generational. I think that'll help us. And so I think that your folks, it sounds like, Blake, is that there's not support in the lending world. Is that, Kristin, what you found in the study, or was it lack of support from somewhere else?
Yeah, what we were finding was kind of overall, and I'll share a few of the stats there. So overall lack of support when it came to financial advice and support. And that was Gen Z compared to millennials, significantly less. They were less likely to turn to a bank or a credit union. They were also less trusting of financial services overall. And lenders, that it kind of spanned I think it was real estate agents, though they were much more trusting of real estate agents than anyone else. And then lenders, or loan officers, and then lenders, and then bank or credit union was the bottom of the list. So it is, when they're talking about overall trust or lack of support or overall support, they're not finding it, I think, in traditional institutions or professionals. But I do think that the more that the individual could connect with them, the more likely they are to build that or feel supported, But I mean, Blake, to your point, like you're saying, who is talking to me, and I think that people aren't really sure how to start those conversations. In fact, I think I saw in the chat, I'll check in a second, but Paul mentioning, like, how do you start those conversations? Todd, what have you noticed to be effective with your team, or any thoughts or questions around that?
I mean, I think the challenge, from a lender's perspective is we're used to the clients being referred to us. So I think that overall conversation is around how do we make more awareness around the opportunity, right? The need for the community to be educating, right? So I think that's obviously part of the mission of what we're trying to do at First Home IQ. And so I think it's just a matter of, if I'm a loan officer listening to this, really thinking, okay, who do I know, who knows who I want to know, and how can I partner with them? And so maybe it's, talking to some younger real estate agents who have got a sphere in the community. I mean, these are those things I'm thinking about, and then maybe figure out how can I help them partner up and talk more about this, whether it's on social media or whether it's creating a gathering, or maybe it's just picking up the phone and calling parents who have kids who are Gen Zs and younger and just saying, hey, how can I help you educate your kids? Because I think oftentimes we don't want to do what our parents did. I think a lot of times that, maybe more millennials than Gen Z, as you mentioned, have PTSD from the financial crisis and maybe a short sale or losing a home in their family. And so I do think that there's a little bit of a gap there. And I think the gap is probably on the education side. And then obviously it's an opportunity gap as well.
Yeah.
So what I want to figure out is, if Allie's the one that's doing all the research for you, Blake, is then how do we connect with people like you and her in the future? Like, how would you become aware of us, and how would you pick out a loan officer or a realtor for that matter?
I would say it has to be someone local. It has to be someone local in your current network. I don't know too many people my age that are loan officers, but I really think I think someone that I would go through the mortgage process with is someone that I know, is someone that is a peer, that someone is already in the mortgage business. I just don't have that network yet. So I think it is going to be hard for generations other than Gen Z to connect with Gen Z for the home buying process. But I really think you just have to become a friend to them. And I mean, I have friends that whenever I hang out with Kristin, some of my friends are like, wow, you hang out with such older people. And Kristin's not.
We're not hanging out. I don't think people are really
reach that.
But the thing is, I would say, since Gen Z is just now starting to get into the workforce, they still have this weird sense of like, oh, these adults, but you're an adult. Like, it's a hard thing to grasp whenever you're going out into the real world. So I think there still is an adjustment period today before Gen Z is accepting of these more senior generations to start connecting with them. But I think the best way is just to try to become a friend with them. I think it will be hard. I don't have a good answer for people that are Gen Xers and baby boomers and everything like that. But really, for millennial loan officers out there that are trying to connect with Gen Z, just showing that you were there in their shoes once before, and that millennial generations were ragged on by older generations. So I guess, just like you said earlier, Todd, empathy, just being able to have the empathy with those younger generation home buyers or potential home buyers is really the best way to connect with them.
I think it's so interesting that you're talking about wanting to work with someone local and that kind of thing. And we have seen that shift in the research around Gen Z wanting that kind of physicality in a way, like wanting to know that this person is real and understands their market and would understand their situation. So I'm curious, like, Blake, do you think that, because I would imagine that regardless of their age, if they were able to come to you and say, let's dive into your finances and make a financial plan, or make a homeownership plan together, that you're going to be excited about that. I mean, you're going to be down to walk through that with that person, regardless of what their age is, right?
Yes, absolutely. I think if someone came to me with a plan in place that was personalized to me, I would probably sign today, whatever that signature would be. But I think if someone came with a plan for my situation, they'd probably have a pretty good deal.
So, and this is where I think, and one of the things we're working on at First Home IQ is to help loan officers and individuals in the industry go into schools and community organizations to show up. Because I don't think that it necessarily, like right now, that it feels like there's this big gap, and there is a big gap between Gen Z or future homebuyers and industry professionals. And so how do we bridge that? We have to find ways to show up with education and then start those conversations and be able to say, like, let's make a plan for you. Maybe someone in college, it's going to be 5 years. Maybe it's actually not going to be 5 years. Maybe it's going to be really really soon, but it's also then going to connect you to probably their parents or other people in their lives that are potentially not connected to a professional as well. One of the things that I was going to share too, one of the big areas that came up was education. Just seeing that was an obstacle. We saw that 27% said personal financial knowledge was a top challenge to their financial situation last year. They were more likely than millennials to say that home maintenance was a concern, that they weren't sure how they were going to maintain their home as a homeowner. So that's kind of a piece of the education process that I think is often left out. And maybe it is more, allocated towards the real estate agent, but I think it's something to have in the conversation, that for us to remember that this is not a transaction. This is a step in someone's life, and how do we comprehensively support someone through that process. Let's see if there's any other aspects of education. It was interesting to see, and Blake, this conflicts with some of Allie's research, but we're seeing, and I'm going to have her contribute on this report as well, that the interest rates were not as much of a factor. 38% said that interest rates and state of the housing market were factors when considering whether to buy a home. But that's still, we've still got, maybe that's a huge amount of the population, but 60% still are saying, we don't care about that.
You know what I would say on that note? I think, kind of to what I mentioned earlier, is that Gen Z looks at what their peers are doing and what their peers are thinking. And if I'm looking on the news right now or any social media channel, Twitter, I see everybody complaining about interest rates, even just outside of the mortgage business, just interest rates altogether. And this crazy news all about how interest rates are so high. So I think that is influencing the respondents to the survey negatively.
Yeah.
They're thinking, wow, if everyone's talking about how these interest rates are high and how everything's so unattainable now, maybe they are right. Maybe I should listen to them. So I think everyone's being influenced to think how they shouldn't be thinking, which I'm sure I play into it also. But to this point, I think that people are just influenced by what they're hearing. And I think if there's a way to show that, hey, there is an option, if you do have a high interest rate today, there is an option down the road that could reduce it. So I think people are just on that part.
That's another piece of the education completely. Todd, were you going to say something?
Well, so you said, Blake, that you would love it if someone came to you with a plan. So what would a plan, what's your view of a plan? Like, help me understand specifically, what does the plan need to include for you to feel like, okay, this person gets it, they get me, and I want to proceed with them?
I see. Well, forgive me if I'm ignorant on the process altogether. But really, if someone came to me to say, hey, you make this much money, you want to keep up this exact lifestyle, and you set aside this much money for whatever it may be. So if someone broke down my finances and told me what I would be able to qualify for, I think that would help me get into a good headspace to proceed with whatever the next step would be. So I'm sure there are steps before getting all my financial information, but being able to have, hey, you can keep up what you're doing today, but you could also have this asset that you will acquire. I think if you just step it out like that, that's the way I would be more likely to move forward with going to buy a home. Does that answer your question, Todd? Or do you want me to get more granular?
That definitely helps. So how much would data help? So like, I know our community, they're all about data. Like, this is the percentage that homes have gone up in the years, and this is the history of interest rates. And so loan officers kind of get in that mode of telling and sell, to sell. And so does that matter to Gen Z?
I think data does matter, but I think it's more of an emotional thing than anything else. So if they can see that they don't have to pay a ton of money today up front, if they don't have to have a lot of cash on hand to have something of substance, I think it'd be really easy for them to make a decision that way. So I think if, what is the instant what do they have to do today to be able to make that happen? I think Gen Z likes instant gratification. If they have to plan out anything in the future, it might make them go crazy. So I guess telling them what they have to do today to make this happen is the plan that they need to have. What's the step today, not, escrow and all that when the loan closes. It's like, what do you have to do today to make it all happen?
So I think today the conversation is they have to have a conversation with the loan officer, right? And then they're probably going to have to give them their financial data, right? So either an application over the phone or online or on an app. And so I think that's where the loan officer struggles, is how do they get that connection and then make it so that you trust them to give them your information and understand that truly that is the step, because then they can answer all those financial questions that you were asking about. They'll know your buying power. They'll know what your down payment has to be. They'll know those things. So I think that's where loan officers get stuck, is in that piece of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I will say, just seeing the application process that a lot of lenders use different point of sales and different processes for gathering some of that information at the beginning of the process. And some of it is very, I would say, the industry as a whole isn't moving quickly enough to meet the demands of what Gen Z wants to do. Like, I want to be on TikTok, click on someone's bio link, and then be able to fill out my information immediately. I don't want to have to make a login. I don't want to have to go on my desktop computer and fill out the information. I want it all to be super easy from TikTok or from Instagram. I don't want to have to go to Safari, then pull out whatever information I need. I want to be able to do it fairly immediately over wherever I'm seeing the content or when I'm communicating with someone. Like, if there was a way to have some of that information over text message, I think that'd be incredible. I know there's a ton of, cybersecurity protocols that all the regulators enforce, but I really think there needs to be a better way to get the information from someone like me to the loan officer or to the lender, because the process to me just seems like too much. Like, I need to be able to do it from my couch, from my phone, very easily.
All right, we can make that happen.
That's good.
One of the questions that has come up a lot when I talk to friends or interview people, whatever, is that they feel that they're a step before that. Like, they're not ready to fill out an application. But I will say, like myself, I thought I wasn't ready to fill out an application, and then I realized I was way ahead of that. I was plenty ready to buy. But I think there's, especially with Gen Z, where they may truly not be ready. And I was just talking to a friend who started to actually tear up, saying, I've worked 2 jobs my entire life, and I don't know, homeownership is totally out of reach for me, and I thought, we've got to make this simpler in a way of making a plan for this person. But I'm sure that a lot of loan officers don't necessarily want to be coaching someone that early on. There's obviously financial apps and stuff like that we can turn people to. But Todd, do you have any thoughts on how we bridge that gap from maybe a Gen Zer who is truly 3 to 5 years down the line of being ready to buy, or a millennial who this feels very unaffordable, as we've been talking about? How do we help provide that guidance in a way that is going to still be efficient and productive for the loan officer, but also feeds that engine? You know what I mean?
Right. So I think there's 2 parts of it, right? There's the part of it that I heard you say that you have to feel comfortable that you're ready to that point. So one is we have to think about what that process looks like. And I think the loan officer has to shift their mind that they're looking for the loan that's going to close in 30 days, maybe 60 days, because they're thinking about paying their own mortgage, versus how to help change someone's life financially by helping them understand home ownership, even if it's 3 to 5 years down the road. So I think the first thing is the loan officers listening. You have to be okay with, you have to have a new, unique value proposition that says, hey, I'm here to help you today or 3 to 5 years down the road. And you have to truly mean it. And then you have to build a process to incubate that relationship. Hopefully that word's not offensive, Blake, but you got to basically build that relationship and keep it going so that in 3 to 5 years, they actually remember who you are because you kept in touch with them. And so I guess the question is, as you mentioned, Kristin, a financial app, or what is it that you all think that a loan officer can provide to you that would make you feel comfortable that, yeah, I should proceed to do an application if I want to buy now, and to stay in a relationship for 3 to 5 years? What information do you need over that time?
Blake, do you think that if someone is having a conversation with you, and let's say you are 3 years down the line, I mean, for one, I'll say continuing that relationship, you're going to make referrals to people who are ready, so that you can become then a referral source in that time. So for loan officers who, are concerned about that. But Blake, do you think that having a referral to a few financial apps that they should look at, or how do you think that they can have that conversation and continue that through the years?
I will say, starting the relationship, I think understanding what the application even means. And I think if you do have to download an app, that will help them have benchmarks or touch points throughout the duration of the relationship is another thing. But I guess I would think that my peers wouldn't know what an application would mean. Like, obviously you have to get your information, but does that mean that my data will update over the course of those 3 to 5 years by just that one application? Do I have to reapply every 6 months to reassess what's happening with my financials? So I think that would be part of it. So if there is an app that I need to download or be referred to be able to have my financials update based on where we're at with rates, where we're at with my own, income and savings, and really understanding what that means for that 3 to 5 year long haul relationship, that you can't have that conversation with the borrower, that, hey, I want to 5 years. But I think just having a way to understand, like, this information I'm giving you could be, refreshed every 3 months and check in, or throughout an app to say, hey, like, this is what it's looking like now, or these are the options today based on your current financial goals or status. So if an app was able to do that, I think it'd be nice to be referred to that. But I would want it to tie into to me actually buying a home. Because if there's a financial app about, hey, this is a better way to save money, or hey, maybe if you saved up $2 more every day, you could buy this home. I think that's a little too much. I think really understanding about, hey, if you make this decision now, you'll be able to, have this much wealth later on.
Mm-hmm. I actually was just looking at a spreadsheet that Neo Home Loans had put together that was showing, they were showing building wealth over like multiple properties. But it was just a spreadsheet, and it was really simple and straightforward. And I thought, okay, this is the kind of thing that even like a rent versus own with using MortgageCoach or things like that can be really helpful when you're just looking at one piece of the puzzle and helping people understand the goal here and then their next step. I've been doing a lot of reading about like educating people with ADHD, because a lot more people have ADHD now, and as we're looking at how to educate Gen Z, that's a piece of this puzzle, and I was thinking that we need to be able to, it's all about like, what is that next step? If you look at the big picture too much, it becomes totally overwhelming. And Blake, you've mentioned that multiple times in this conversation, which I think is really interesting. And I feel the same way, but I also have ADHD, but it's like, you look at all these different pieces and you're like, this is totally out of reach for me. So I like that process of thinking, not necessarily referring someone. And I was referring to a third party app like Mint or even, FinLocker could be something that people use, but that's like, that is overwhelming too, and I think it does make sense for someone to be really, really clear about that first next step and then continue the conversation as they go.
Yeah, I don't know much about all the front end solutions in the mortgage space on how to really capture consumers for the long haul. But if I have a folder on my phone of just all my finance apps, whether it's a bank account, credit union, or credit card, or any like Mint, and I have a bunch of meaningless investment accounts too on different apps that are trendy on the App Store. And so there's probably like 20 apps in one folder about my finances, and they're not all aligned. They don't have the same goals. But I think if there's a way to tie in this huge financial goal into one, I think that's best for me to be able to, make a decision or really follow along with that. And it's funny you mentioned the ADHD thing, because I was going to mention ADHD earlier. I read an article recently about how Gen Z, the article was talking about how people are overprescribed medically for ADHD and things like of that nature. But it seems like it's a huge trend that people of my generation just can't focus on certain aspects of their lives. And I don't know if it's just made up, but ADHD is real. But I think a way to just be able to capture people's attentions on the important aspects. Obviously, you have to have all the disclosures and all that, but just highlighting like the important pieces of what this means for me in the long term is helpful.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I do think. Go ahead.
Are you looking
Go ahead,
at it from
Todd.
a perspective, Blake, of that this is a long-term roof over your head and you're building a home and this is where you're going to live? Or are you thinking about it from wealth creation?
I think it's wealth creation. Because wealth creation, but also being able to understand where that wealth is going. Like what does that mean if I own a home? Like if my name's on the deed, like what does that mean? Because the other day I was changing up the beneficiaries on all my bank accounts and investments and life insurance. And I'm thinking, wow, there's so many things in so many different places. And I don't really know what's really out there that's attached to me. And I think the same would go for a home. You know, what does that mean if I own a home? What does that mean for someone that is in a connected world where I want to be able to look on my phone and say, oh, wow, I do own a home. It is right there. Yes, that is the equity that I have in that home now. And this is attached to me forever. So I think if there's a way to have almost like a pulse on your home ownership wealth, for me would be something that, I mean, maybe it exists out there. I would love to know. But that's kind of my take on it.
I think HomeBot does that, right?
Yeah, there's a
Todd,
few
are
out
you
there,
aware?
right?
There's
Yeah,
a few,
HomeBot
okay.
does that. HOA.com has a new one called the Home Safe Report, which is really intriguing because it brings in more people in your network to it, like your financial advisor, and
Cool.
you know, like white and blue collar folks. So there's a cool opportunity there, and they're off on the side. I'm talking about weaving in First Home IQ. So there's a big opportunity there. But I do love that whole idea of where it's going. And, you know, I just think at you know, it's funny because, you know, I won't mention their name because they proved my point in Zoom saying, I don't know of a loan officer who's going to nurture a relationship for 3 to 5 years. And I think that's the challenge, right? I mean, again, that proves sort of what I believe is it. And I think where, you know, I would say that I built my career was, you know, on the whole platform of annual mortgage reviews. And really how I met Dave and how I, you know, first was interviewed in this channel was the fact that I built long-term relationships with clients. And I think what we have to change as an industry is that a client isn't just someone who's going to buy now and has closed with us. A client is actually someone who's in our future pipeline and we build relationship with. And so, all right, I'm intrigued by that one. So I'll be quiet and think for a minute.
Well,
I love what you said. Go ahead, Blake.
I was going to say, I watched one of Dave's videos the other day. It was a video of Dave and Greg Share from NFM Lending. And Greg and I know, Kristin, you know Greg pretty well. And I'm sure a lot of people in the mortgage business know Greg. But something that he said that really stuck with me was that the majority of independent mortgage bankers are not prepared for Gen Z. It's a completely different way to do mortgages. And to this question that was in the chat about they can't loan officers really can't create a relationship for 3 to 5 years for these potential clients. It's a new way of doing business for a lot of independent mortgage bankers out there and loan officers. And like Greg said, no one is prepared and people are still trying to prepare. And with his big influencer division, he even said that, you know, he still has a lot of work to do to make sure that they are prepared and in a good space when these millions and millions of new home buyers come to the market for the first time.
Yeah, I think that we're in this really, really pivotal moment in the history of our society, but also this industry where we are in a place where we have to adapt to the way that people build relationships, they do business, and the way that we learn, you know? So, I mean, someone mentioned in the chat too about how, what do you think of AI? And I want to talk about that for a second. But also just to wrap things up a little bit, one of the big strategies that we have to take away from right now to think about reaching Gen Z is how do you build relationships at scale? And I think that, Gen Z needs to have that personalization. How are you using your database? How are you staying in touch with things like annual reviews? How are you staying in touch using social media and these kinds of tools that are available to you that cannot be what we've done in the past, which is selling and just kind of blanket information online. It has to come down to how are you staying in touch on an individual basis. And I think that you're going to benefit from having people that, even if they aren't able to buy in a short term time period, they're going to make referrals for you that are going to build your business and be building your pipeline. So that's one piece of this kind of adapting to the new market. But also, we were talking about ADHD and how this is the first time in the, I mean, we've had over a decade now of having our cell phones attached to us and having screens just constantly surrounding us. And we're experiencing the effects of that. And that means that we're constantly needing to shift to the way that we're communicating. We're not going to be able to give that huge, big picture all the time. We're going to need to break it down to small pieces and be able to say, here's your next step. Because that's how, when we're in this kind of attention deficit economy, that's what we need, So before we shift into talking about AI really quick, any other comments or thoughts as we've been talking about how we're adapting to this new market?
I think everyone's still trying to figure out the best approach. So really just being one big economy, one big industry as a whole, trying to figure out what that means for the future is I guess the last thing I want to touch on. But it's going to take the industry as a whole to figure out where to go. So not everybody has the perfect answers, and just coming up with the answers as a whole is going to be the way forward.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think that, I'm stuck on the whole thing that you just said, that we're not prepared for Gen Z because it's a completely different way to do a mortgage. So all I would encourage, put my loan officer coach's hat on, is that the next time that you're talking to somebody who is a different generation than you, especially a Gen Z, since we're digging in there, is to ask more questions, right? Again, it's going back to the find out what's important to them and then figure out what your next step is versus telling them what the next step is.
Yeah, I love that. So as part of adapting to the new market, we can't leave out AI and the role that ChatGPT and other developments around AI is going to play in our ability to learn and process information around getting a mortgage. Blake, do you have any thoughts on how you think that the role of AI is going to play into our Gen Z's, I guess, approach to getting a mortgage?
I think AI is a very tricky subject. I think it's a great tool to use, just be productive. But when it comes to building relationships, I think AI isn't the end all be all. And I think people that have grown up with technology their whole entire lives, especially a smartphone, you can see through an AI chat bot. You can see through some of those things, especially whenever you are trying to talk to maybe your bank or credit card company about a transaction through the chat feature, or even on airlines. I feel like it drives me crazy. So AI, I think, is a good tool to be more efficient and stay productive, but I really think that be able to connect with customers, it needs to be your personality, because people are still going to buy from people. But utilizing AI is really important. But still, an AI talking to me about my future is not what I want.
Yeah, it goes back to that whole conversation around personalization. And I think AI is going to continue to grow really quickly, and that your answer may change, but I think that we're still going to want that personal connection to some degree. So in wrapping up, Todd, any last thoughts? Oh, and I did want to plug, who was it that came on the channel last Friday? Todd, do you remember who was
Bob Bodine?
Robert. What was it?
Bob Bodine, the author of.
No, I'm thinking of the person talking about AI on Friday.
Robert Stover's coming on next Friday. Friday. Yeah, sorry, I was going back on Friday. Yeah. Yes, Robert Stover on, and I don't think our community remembers that Robert Stover actually talked about it with us more than a year ago about using AI to write headlines and do other things. So he was talking about AI, didn't necessarily call it AI and call it out for what it was, but he's always the person that Dave has written big checks to in the past and has really poured into our community with what we should know at a really high level. So definitely Friday, 9 a.m., be here. It'll be a great opportunity. And then I'm going to tease a little bit Scriptapalooza. We've got a superstar co-host that's going to join Dave and I for that at the end of May. So be watching out. We're going to put out some official announcements on that in the next week or two. So super excited for Scriptapalooza 2023.
Awesome. Well, lots of good things coming in this channel. I'm so glad to have had the opportunity to chat with you guys today and contribute to the community. Any last words in terms of how we, build strategies to adapt to this market? Blake, I'll start with you.
I would say stay personalized, stay consistent, especially if using social media as the main channel to communicate with Gen Z, and really just, there's no perfect way to do it now, but just, come up with good ways amongst your own colleagues within the mortgage industry and even real estate industry on what's working and what's not working, and always checking to see if you're going in the right route to better reach the next generation of home buyer.
Perfect. Todd, how about you?
Well, you know what? First off, Blake, it was awesome having the conversation. I appreciate you sharing with our community. And I would just say a couple of things. Number one is that if you're excited about the opportunity to help the youth of America be more financially fit, you said it so well when we opened up. I got to learn our first Home IQ tagline better. But the bottom line is join us in what we've got going on. At least, all you need to do is go to firsthomiq.com and register to get on our emails. If nothing else, there's other ways to support us. And I'm just super grateful for you, Kristin, and what you're doing, not just for the First Home IQ community, but that you're coming here and continuing to pour into Trust Engine. I'm looking forward to your article coming out on the 1st. And then I would just say, really, from a loan officer perspective, right? You are listening to somebody who's giving you the roadmap to build relationship and rapport with a generation that may be different than you. And you need to be thinking about this in every conversation you have, whether it's Gen Z, whether it's millennial, whether you're talking to someone that's older than you, and think about how can you do that in a different way. I hate to say it, you all have more time than you've had before. And so spend the extra time that you have to build relationship, and then think about how you can do what Blake just said. How can you personalize it? How can you stay consistent with it? And then I think ultimately, if you can figure that out and then share it back with the community, I know that Chris and I and Dave will continue to do that. So join us for the ride.
Oh, I love it. What a great way to close. Thank you so much, both of you. And thanks to the community. Everyone have a great rest of your day.
Cool. Thank you, guys.
All right. See y'all. It's always great to be here.